The sun drapes the village of Kachhera in gold, stretching over narrow dirt paths, glistening off tin roofs, and warming the air with the scent of ripe mangoes and damp earth. Radha's feet move swiftly, dust swirling around her ankles as she balances a clay pot on her hip. The village hums with life. Children dart through alleys, women gather at the communal well, and men squat under banyan trees, murmuring about the day's work. Radha smiles. This is home. Simple, predictable, safe. At 16, she is neither a child nor yet a woman, but old enough to understand the unspoken rules that govern Kachhera. She belongs to the Dalit community, untouchables, as the upper caste still whisper when they think no one hears. Jhri, her childhood friend, comes from the same roots. They've been inseparable since they could walk, sharing everything, stories, dreams, even the occasional stolen guava from the Patel orchards. But some friendships, Radha knows, are tolerated only within the boundaries of childhood. Radha, hurry up. Jhri's voice cuts through the warm air, his lanky figure already climbing the well's stone ledge. Radha rolls her eyes, picking up her pace. She knows what's coming. You're too slow, he teases as she reaches the well. You're too annoying, she fires back, shoving him lightly. He laughs, gripping the rope, and they haul water together, their movements synchronized from years of practice. But then a shadow falls over them. Radha stiffens. Jhri does too. Manoj Singh stands a few feet away, arms folded over his broad chest. A Thakur, upper caste, entitled, untouchable in the way that matters. He's barely 20, but the air around him carries the weight of generations who have ruled this village like kings. His eyes settle on Radha first, then drift to Jhri with something colder than disapproval. Contempt. Didn't I tell you people to wait your turn? His voice is smooth, but there's an edge to it. Radha swallows. This isn't new. Upper castes use the well first. It's unwritten, unchallenged. Today, though, there's no one else around. Jhri tightens his grip on the rope. His knuckles turn white. The well is empty, Manoj Bhaiya, he says, voice steady. We're not stopping anyone. Manoj steps forward. Too close. His presence presses against them like a suffocating heat. Radha grips Jhri's wrist. A warning. Not here. Not now. Manoj smirks, flicking a finger against Jhri's bucket. Water sloshes over the edge, darkening the dirt beneath. Clean that up, he says, voice light. With your hands. Silence. Radha can hear her own heartbeat. Jhri doesn't move. A breeze stirs the dust. Somewhere, a crow caws. Then Jhri speaks. No. Radha's breath catches. Manoj's smile fades. Something shifts in the air. Small, barely a crack. But Radha knows cracks grow. And today, something has begun to break. Radha can't shake the feeling. It clings to her skin like humidity, an invisible weight pressing against her chest. The well incident should have been nothing. Just another moment of caste arrogance, the kind they've learned to swallow since childhood. But Jhri's defiance had changed something. It was reckless, dangerous, and Manoj Singh does not forget. The days stretch on, but the village feels different. She notices it in the way people look at Jhri now, quick glances, hushed whispers. The way the Patel brothers stop talking when he walks past. The way her mother warns her, voice low, urgent. Stay away from trouble, Radha. You hear me? Trouble. As if it has a shape, a name, a shadow that moves through Kachhera, watching, waiting. And then the cattle begin to die. First, it's an old ox, found stiff near the rice fields. Then a buffalo, its body bloated in the midday sun. Some say it's the heat. Others whisper darker things. A curse, perhaps. The village has always been superstitious. But Radha sees the way eyes drift toward Jhri's home, the way fingers point when they think no one is watching. One evening, she finds Jhri sharpening his sickle behind his hut, the rhythmic scrape of metal against stone filling the silence. His face is unreadable, but Radha knows him too well. They're blaming you, aren't they? She asks. Jhri doesn't look up. They're waiting for a reason, a justification. That's how it works. First, they isolate you. Then, they make the village believe you deserve what's coming. Radha's stomach twists. That night, she hears shouting outside. A group of men stand near the Patel household, voices raised. She recognizes them. Manoj is among them, his posture relaxed, like he already owns the night. The crops are failing, someone says. Too many bad omens, another mutters. Then a single voice. This started after Jhri defied the Thakurs. Radha grips the wooden frame of her window. Blood roars in her ears. Manoj says nothing at first. He lets the silence stretch, lets the words settle like dust. Then finally he speaks. We have rules in this village, he says. Rules that keep everything in order. A murmur of agreement ripples through the group. Maybe it's time we remind people what happens when you break them. Radha's breath stutters. She turns away from the window, heart pounding. She has no proof, but she knows. Something is coming, and Jhri is in danger. Radha finds Jhri by the river at dusk, the sky bruised with orange and deepening indigo. He stands ankle-deep in the water, staring at the current, his sickle resting against his thigh. He doesn't turn when she approaches. They're planning something, she says, voice tight. I heard them last night. Jhri exhales, slow and measured. I know. Of course he knows. He's lived long enough to recognize the signs, the quiet avoidance, the murmurs that stop when he walks by. The way even the air in the village feels different, like a storm pressing against the earth before it breaks. We have to do something, Radha insists. Jhri finally looks at her. His eyes are steady, but there's something behind them, a weight, a quiet resignation. And what do you think we can do, Radha? The words cut. He isn't scared. He's expecting this. She swallows hard. We can tell the Sarpanch. A bitter laugh escapes him. You think the Sarpanch will side with us? Radha hesitates. The Sarpanch is supposed to be the village's leader, neutral and just. But everyone knows where his loyalties lie. He was at the Patel house that night, listening as Manoj planted the idea of Jhri's defiance in their minds. Still, she refuses to believe there's no way out. There must be someone, she says. Someone who'll speak for you. Jhri shakes his head. They've already decided, Radha. I just don't know what the punishment will be. Radha clenches her fists. No, not this time. The next morning, she moves through the village with purpose. She watches, listens. She catches scraps of conversation, words that turn her stomach. Maybe if he begs, the Thakurs will show mercy. He should have known his place. Sometimes a lesson must be taught. The lesson. That's what they call it when Dalits are punished. Sometimes it's a public beating. Sometimes it's exile. Sometimes, Radha doesn't let herself think about the worst of it. She finds Jhri's mother, Amma, sitting outside their hut, grinding millet with slow mechanical motions. The lines on her face seem deeper today. They're coming for him, Radha says, her voice barely above a whisper. Amma doesn't stop grinding. I know. Radha crouches beside her. Then we have to do something. Amma's hands falter for just a second. Then she sighs. You think this is new, child? That this hasn't happened before? Radha swallows. It doesn't have to happen again. Amma finally looks at her, searching her face for something. Then, she stands abruptly, wiping her hands on her sari. They go to 3 houses. A farmer, a weaver, a potter. Dalits, all of them. Each time, Amma speaks in a quiet, firm voice. Each time, Radha watches expressions shift, fear, hesitation, then something else. Resolve. By midday, 10 people gather in Jhri's courtyard. It's not much, but it's a start. Jhri watches from the doorway, arms crossed. What is this? A fight, Radha says. Jhri looks at the faces, his people, his community. He sees their fear, but he also sees something stronger. We go to the Sarpanch, Amma says. If we go together, he has to listen. Jhri exhales. Then slowly he nods. The Sarpanch's house is large, shaded by neem trees. When they arrive, they aren't alone. Manoj and 3 other Thakur men stand at the entrance, arms folded. They were expecting this. You've wasted your time, Manoj says lazily. Go home. Amma steps forward. We want a meeting. The Sarpanch emerges then, a tall man with a lined face. He looks at Amma, then at the small crowd behind her. His gaze settles on Jhri. You've caused quite a stir, boy. Jhri stands his ground. I only took water. Manoj chuckles. You broke tradition. Radha steps in. Tradition? You mean the rules you created to keep us beneath you? Manoj's smile vanishes. The Sarpanch sighs, rubbing his temples. What do you want? Radha takes a breath. Fairness. The Sarpanch looks at the crowd again. He's calculating, measuring. Finally, he nods. We'll hold a panchayat tomorrow. Radha lets out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. But Manoj? Manoj just smiles. And Radha knows this isn't over. It's only just begun. The village gathers in the open square, dust swirling beneath restless feet. The sun glares down, unrelenting, as voices murmur in anticipation. The panchayat, the village council, sits in a semicircle beneath the banyan tree, their expressions unreadable. The Sarpanch, his face carved with age and authority, raises a hand. Let the matter be heard. Radha stands beside Jhri, her heartbeat a drum against her ribs. Across from them, Manoj Singh stands with his arms crossed, his smirk lazy and confident. Behind him, a group of Thakur men lean against the temple wall, their eyes sharp, waiting. Jhri, the Sarpanch begins. It has been said that you defied the rules of this village, that you took water from the well meant for the upper castes, that you spoke against those above you. Do you deny it? Jhri doesn't flinch. I do not deny it. Murmurs ripple through the crowd. Radha hears the word arrogance whispered among them. But Jhri doesn't lower his gaze. Manoj steps forward, voice oozing mockery. So you admit you disrespected your place? Jhri's jaw tightens, but before he can speak, Radha steps in. His place. And what place is that, Manoj? The smirk fades slightly. He wasn't expecting her to challenge him so boldly. The place your ancestors accepted, Manoj says smoothly. The place that keeps this village running without chaos. He turns to the crowd, voice rising. What happens when men like Jhri forget who they are? Crops fail. Cattle die. The gods turn away. A few heads nod. Fear is a powerful weapon. Radha clenches her fists. And what if the crops failed because of drought? What if the cattle died from disease? Or, she lets the words hang, watching Manoj closely. Or what if it was something else? The murmurs grow uneasy. Manoj's smirk returns, sharper now. You have a sharp tongue, Radha, he says. But words don't change reality. Jhri's actions have brought misfortune, and the village must decide how to correct it. A chill passes through Radha. Correct it. She knows what that means. Public punishment, humiliation, exile, or worse. But she is ready. You speak of misfortune, she says, stepping forward. Then let's talk about it. Because I think we all deserve to know the truth. The crowd stills. Even the Sarpanch leans in slightly. Radha lifts her chin. I heard the men outside the Patel house that night. I heard you, Manoj. Manoj's smile falters, just for a fraction of a second. I heard how you suggested that Jhri needed to be taught a lesson. How the village needed a sign to remind them of their place. And then, suddenly, cattle start dying. She tilts her head. Curious, isn't it? A murmur spreads. Doubt. A crack in Manoj's armor. You're grasping at shadows, Manoj says, but his voice isn't as steady. Radha takes a step closer, lowering her voice just enough that only he can hear. The potter's son saw your men near the fields that night, near the water troughs. Manoj's eyes darken, a flicker of something dangerous. She raises her voice again. If you have nothing to hide, Manoj, then let's have the wells and water tested. She turns to the Sarpanch. If the water was poisoned, we'll know soon enough. Gasps ripple through the crowd. Manoj laughs, but there's no humor in it. You think you're clever? Radha doesn't blink. I think the village deserves the truth. The Sarpanch studies them both, then nods slowly. Very well. If there is evidence, we will see it. A stillness falls. Manoj's smirk is gone. His fists clench at his sides. Radha has him. He knows it. And for the first time, she sees something in his eyes she never expected. Fear that a thick silence hangs over the village square, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant caw of a crow. Manoj Singh, the untouchable Thakur in all the ways that matter, stands frozen. His smirk is gone. His fists clench so tightly that his knuckles turn white. Radha watches him carefully. He knows. He knows the truth is clawing its way to the surface. The Sarpanch, who had watched the exchange with narrowed eyes, finally speaks. Radha, you claim the water was tampered with. Do you have proof? Radha takes a breath. Yes. A ripple of shock moves through the crowd. Manoj's men shift uneasily. Manoj himself lets out a short, humorless laugh. This is absurd. She's grasping at rumors. Where is this so-called proof? Radha turns to the crowd. The potter's son, Suraj. He saw them. Heads turn. Suraj, a thin boy of 12, stands at the edge of the gathering, half hidden behind his father. His face is pale, uncertain. His father places a protective hand on his shoulder. Radha's voice softens. "Suraj, tell them what you told me." The boy swallows hard. All eyes are on him. For a moment, Radha thinks he won't speak. But then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he says, "I saw them, near the Patel's field. Late at night. They had something in a sack. They poured it into the water troughs." A collective gasp rises. Manoj steps forward, fury flashing across his face. "Lies. The boy is lying." He turns to the Sarpanch. "You'll believe a child over me?" Radha isn't done. She raises her voice. "Suraj isn't the only one who saw something." She turns. Lakshmi Mousi, an elderly woman, wrapped in a faded green sari, steps forward slowly. She has been in the village longer than most, a silent observer. But today, she isn't silent. "I saw them too," she says. Her voice is rough with age but firm. "I heard their voices near the fields. I thought nothing of it then. But now," she lifts her chin, her gaze settling on Manoj. "Now I understand what I heard. The village erupts. Poisoning the water? All to punish a Dalit boy. How could they?" Manoj's face is red with fury. "You listen to these low-caste dogs instead of me?" He snarls at the Sarpanch. "You would believe them over a Thakur?" The Sarpanch doesn't answer immediately. His gaze sweeps over the village. He sees the shift, the doubt, the danger of protecting someone who has lost control of the narrative. Then finally he speaks. "The water will be tested. If it was poisoned, there will be consequences." A slow, creeping panic settles over Manoj's features. For the first time, Radha sees what he looks like when his power is slipping through his fingers. He turns to the Thakur men behind him, but their expressions are unreadable. No one wants to go down with him. Radha steps closer, her voice low. "You were always so sure no one would dare to challenge you. But you forgot something, Manoj." His eyes snap to hers. "We are not afraid anymore." A muscle ticks in his jaw. His breath comes faster. And then, without warning, he lunges. A blur of motion. A hand grabs Radha's wrist, too tight, painful. But before he can do anything more, Jhri moves. There is a sickening crack as Jhri's fist collides with Manoj's jaw. The Thakur stumbles back, eyes wide with shock. The village is stunned into silence. Then chaos erupts. Manoj's men surge forward, but the Dalit men, those who had been silent for generations, step in. The village is no longer standing still. Radha breathes heavily, clutching her aching wrist. She meets Jhri's gaze. He nods. The tables have turned. The news spreads like wildfire. By sundown, the entire village knows. The panchayat's verdict is clear. Manoj and his men poisoned the water, orchestrated the suffering, all to punish Jhri for daring to drink from the well. The evidence is undeniable. Witnesses have spoken. The Sarpanch, sensing the tide turning against the Thakurs, has no choice but to act. By morning, the police arrive. For years, men like Manoj have been untouchable. Today, that changes. The sight of uniformed officers stepping into the square sends a ripple through the crowd. The villagers, especially the Dalits, stand at a distance, watching, waiting. Manoj emerges from his house, arrogance still clinging to him like a second skin. "This is a mistake," he sneers. "Do you know who I am?" But the officer doesn't hesitate. "We do. That's why we're here." The slap of cold metal against Manoj's wrists silences the village. His hands are bound. For the first time, he is powerless. His men, the ones who stood so tall behind him, shrink away. None of them dare intervene. They know better now. The fear they used to command is gone. As the officers drag him toward the waiting jeep, Manoj turns. His gaze finds Radha. There's no more bravado, no more smirks. Just cold, seething hatred. "You think this changes anything?" he spits. Radha meets his glare, unflinching. It already has. The doors slam shut. The jeep rumbles to life. And just like that, Manoj Singh is gone. For the first time in weeks, the air in the village feels different. Lighter. Radha and Jhri walk back to the river, the place where it all began. The water flows steady, eternal, uncaring of the boundaries humans try to place upon it. Jhri watches it for a long moment before he speaks. You didn't have to fight for me. Radha shakes her head. Yes, I did. He turns to her then, something unreadable in his eyes. They'll never forget this. The village. The Thakurs. She exhales. Good. Because forgetting is what allows injustice to repeat. And Radha refuses to let history swallow this moment. Behind them, voices rise, Dalit women drawing water from the well. No fear. No hesitation. Just the simple act of belonging. It's not everything, but it's a start.